Hi everyone, this week's manner of death is homicide. And this video is going to be a little different compared to my usual content, but I hope you receive it just as well. So if you've been watching the news, there's been a recent update on a suspect for the infamous Gilgo Beach murders, also known as the Long Island serial killings. Rex Heuermann has been arrested and is considered a suspect for the murders of Waterman, Melissa Barthelemy, and Amber Lynn Costello. He's also the prime suspect for Maureen Brainard-Barnes' death. A lot of the news sources are focusing mainly on him, as this is a big development and everyone wants to know more about the alleged killer. I, however, want to give a broader recap on the murders, the identified victims, and also the remaining unidentified victims, who still need to have their names found and their killers brought to justice. The 4 victims that Heuermann is being tied to are known as the Gilgo 4. The first victim is thought to be Maureen Brainard-Barnes, a 25-year-old woman who was living in Norwich, Connecticut. She was born on July 14, 1982. She was a mother of 2 and had worked various types of jobs, such as a card dealer in a casino, a cashier, and a telemarketer. Her friend described her as, quote, someone who had a lot of energy and who thought everyone was her friend, end quote. On July 6, 2007, Maureen went missing. At the time, she was working as a sex worker and was advertising her work on Craigslist and Backpage using pseudonyms like Juliana and Marie. She was known to travel to Manhattan for a few days to work out of motels before returning to Connecticut. Oftentimes, she would travel with another female sex worker and a male friend who would act as their protection while they worked. The day she went missing, she traveled with her female friend, taking an Amtrak train from New London, Connecticut, to Grand Central Terminal in Manhattan. That weekend, her friend returned, leaving Maureen behind. She was last heard from on July 9, 2007, at 11:43 p.m., when she called another friend. Generally, she worked out of motel rooms, but she had told her friend during her last call that she was going to meet a client on an out call. Maureen was reported missing on July 14, 2007. It was over 3 years before her body was recovered from Gilgo Beach during the search for Shannon Gilbert on December 13, 2010. The second victim is believed to be Melissa Barthelemy, a 24-year-old woman who was also a sex worker. She lived in the Unionport area of the Bronx. She had dreams of opening her own beauty salon. She went missing after being last seen on July 12, 2009 at her basement apartment on Underhill Avenue. Like Maureen Brainard-Barnes, Melissa posted her services to sites such as Adult Friend Finder under the pseudonyms of Chloe and Very Sexy Chloe. She had several identifying tattoos on her back, such as the words Blaze and Focus. Melissa mainly met clients at bars, restaurants, and hotels in Manhattan's West Side. The last night she was known to be alive, she had told a friend that she was seeing a man and would return in the morning. Her cell phone records demonstrated that she traveled, most likely by taxi, from the Bronx to Manhattan. Her mother, Lynn Barthelemy, had not had contact with her for several days and filed a missing persons report with the NYPD on July 18, 2009, 6 days after Melissa was last heard from. The cell phone records show that her phone pinged from Manhattan, Freeport, Massapequa, and Lindenhurst. Strangely, a horrid occurrence kept happening after her disappearance. Melissa's younger sister received multiple calls made from a burner phone from a male caller taunting her. The killer admitted to killing and sexually assaulting Melissa and would continue to make these taunting calls. The calls were traced to Midtown Manhattan, which is near Rex Heuermann's office that was located there at the time. She was a missing person for over a year when her body was uncovered on December 11, 2010, in the search for Shannon Gilbert at Gilgo Beach. The third victim is Waterman, who was a 22-year-old mother of 1 living in Scarborough, Maine at the time she was killed. She was involved in sex work and had advertised on Craigslist and Backpage, similar to Maureen Brainard-Barnes and Melissa Barthelemy. Her pseudonyms were Lexi and Sexy Lexi. Her family last saw her boarding a Concord Trailways bus in Maine that was heading to New York. Her pimp might have went with her as well. During her stay in New York, Megan roomed at the Holiday Inn Express in Wappage. At 1:30 a.m. on the morning of June 6th, she left the hotel to meet with a client. She phoned her pimp, who was in Brooklyn, that she was leaving to go to a convenience store near the hotel. Megan was a mother to a 3-year-old daughter, and when she didn't reach out to her family to check in on her, they became worried and filed a police report for a missing person 2 days later in Maine. Her body was recovered from Gilgo Beach on December 13th, 2010. Her pimp was arrested 2 years later for unrelated federal charges of interstate trafficking of prostitutes. The fourth of the Gilgo Beach victims is Amber Lynn Costello. She was a 27-year-old woman living in West Babylon, New York, in a home with several roommates. She was suffering from heroin addiction and also was a sex worker. Like the other victims, she advertised her services on Craigslist and Backpage. Her pseudonyms were Carolina or Mia. She also had several tattoos, one being a butterfly on her lower back, the word chaos, spelled with a K, on her neck, and the word Margaret on her leg. Amber originally moved from Clearwater, Florida to New York and completed a 28-day drug rehab. However, she had relapsed shortly before she went missing. Amber and her roommate shared a cell phone. Her female roommate was also involved in sex work, and the 2 male roommates would use the phone to create appointments for clients with the women. Amber Lynn Costello would perform call-ins at their home and also call-outs. The 2 male roommates would run a scam sometimes when a client would come to their house. Once the client paid the money, the male roommates would confront him to claim Amber was their girlfriend and would run him off without receiving any of the services. This was not the case on the day Amber Lynn Costello went missing. She was last seen leaving her home on September 2nd, 2010 for a call-out to meet a client. She did not take the shared cell phone and was never reported missing. Her body was also recovered on December 13th, 2010 on Gilgo Beach. These are the 4 victims linked to Rex Heuermann. They have many similarities in common, such as their appearance, work profession, and the way they went missing when going out to meet a client away from the safety of others. There are other victims found at Gilgo Beach, but they have not been connected to Rex Heuermann. Jessica Taylor is another person whose partial remains were found in the Gilgo Beach area on March 29, 2011. She was a 20-year-old escort working in New York City. Originally, some of her remains were found in a wooded area in Manorville, New York, on July 26, 2003. When her remains were found at Gilgo, she was listed as Jane Doe number 5, as she was the 5th unidentified victim found within the time period of the search for Shannon Gilbert. When her remains from Manorville were matched with her remains from Gilgo Beach, the police realized that they belonged to Jessica Taylor and that there was a connection between the 2 areas. Another person located at Gilgo Beach is Valerie Mack. She was a 24-year-old woman living in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She worked as a sex worker and used the pseudonym Melissa Taylor. Family members say they last saw Valerie in the spring or summer of 2000 in Port Republic, New Jersey. She was never reported missing. Several months later, in September of 2000, her partial remains were discovered in Manorville. Because she was unidentified, they were simply labeled as Jane Doe number 6. On April 4th, 2011, more partial remains were found at Gilgo Beach. They were unidentified until May of 2020, when genetic genealogy tied both sets of remains to Valerie Mack. She was the 2nd victim to have had her remains separated and found in Manorville and Gilgo Beach, much like Jessica Taylor. All of these people were recovered because of a search for Shannon Gilbert. Shannon lived a similar life to the other women. She was living in Jersey City at the time and was working as a sex worker who advertised her services on Craigslist. On May 21st, 2010, Shannon traveled from Manhattan with her driver Michael Pack to Oak Beach Association, the gated community where her client for the day, Joseph Brewer, lived. Michael Pack, the driver, stayed outside with the car, while Shannon went inside. While in the home, her client, Joseph Brewer, claimed she acted irrationally, and eventually he asked her to leave, which she did by running away. Shannon knocked on some neighbors' doors. She was calling 911 and on the phone with the dispatcher while she was outside fleeing. The tapes of the calls have been released, and on one of them, Shannon is saying, "These people are trying to kill me," quote, "and somebody's after me," end quote. The call ends with screaming and sounds of someone running. One of the homes Shannon knocked on the door of was Gus Coletti. He called 911, saying he saw her screaming and that there was a man following her. That's what is known for sure about what occurred. Somehow she ended up in a marshy area close to Oak Beach, where her body was found a year and a half later, on December 13th, 2011. According to the police, they believe she ran into this section, became stuck, and drowned or died of exposure. An autopsy was performed, but was inconclusive. Her family did have a private autopsy performed, and that medical examiner discovered injuries to her neck that may be signs of strangulation, but there's not enough evidence to say for sure that it was the cause of her death. Because of this, the authorities do not consider her death to be a homicide or tied to any of the other victims at Gilgo Beach. There are some odd occurrences with Shannon Gilbert's case. Her wallet, jeans, and shoes were found on one side of the marshy area, but her body was found a quarter of a mile away, which she would have had to have traveled on foot without shoes or pants. It's odd that she would be such a distance from her belongings, but at this time, her death is still seen as accidental. That's it for all of the identified victims of this Gilgo Beach case. However, there are 11 victims whose remains were recovered from this area, and 4 sets of remains are yet to be identified. On April 20th, 1996, human legs were found wrapped in a plastic bag in Davis Park on Blue Point Beach on Fire Island in Suffolk County. These remains were connected to a skull found along Ocean Parkway in Nassau County on April 11, 2011. They are known as Jane Doe No. 7, who is still unidentified. Some identifying scars are noted on the legs recovered from Fire Island. On the left leg, there was a 2-inch surgical scar with suture scars on the left ankle, potentially meaning Jane Doe No. 7 had ankle surgery. On the right leg, there was a 3.5-inch scar on the lower section of the leg and a 1-inch scar in the same region, along with a 1/2-inch scar on the right ankle. Another set of remains was discovered belonging to a toddler. On April 4, 2011, a young female's skeletal remains were found near Ocean Parkway, close to where Valerie Mack was found. Her age is estimated to be around 2 years old and likely of non-Caucasian ethnicity. Found with the baby doe was golden jewelry. DNA later proved that the child is the child of another unidentified Jane Doe, known as Peaches. Peaches is a nickname given to a Jane Doe whose partial remains were found in Hempstead Lake State Park on June 28, 1997. A hiker saw her remains inside of a green Rubbermaid container in a wooded section of the park. Her body was placed in a black plastic bag. She was given the nickname because of a bitten, heart-shaped peach tattoo on her body. A maroon-colored towel and a dark-colored pillowcase with flowers were found with her torso. Peaches is African American and somewhere between the ages of 20 and 30. She also has a surgical scar showing she had a cesarean section performed. A week after her daughter was found in Ocean Parkway, a second set of remains belonging to Peaches was discovered nearby in the brush of Zacks Bay at Jones Beach State Park in Nassau County on April 11, 2011. Found with these remains were some gold bracelets similar to how golden jewelry was found with her toddler, or baby doe. This is the same day that Jane Doe number 7's remains were also found, so 2 sets of partial remains were uncovered. I've noticed there seems to be a weird pattern or fixation for killers to separate the remains of their victims and to scatter them in different locations. It's just gruesome, and it just shows so much disrespect for the victim. The last set of remains to be unidentified is probably the most unusual. All of the bodies found so far belong to biological adult females, except for the toddler. But on April 4th, 2011, skeletal remains of an Asian male were discovered in the Ocean Parkway area. The unidentified is known locally as John Doe number 8 or Gilgo Beach Doe. They are thought to be between the ages of 17 and 23 years old and stood at 5 feet 6 inches with bad teeth or poor dental hygiene. They estimate Gilgo Beach Doe died 5 to 10 years before being recovered, which places the date of death between 2001 to 2006. They may have also suffered from a musculoskeletal disorder that affected their gait when walking. Gilgo Beach Doe was found wearing women's clothing, so it's possible the victim was transgender. There is a theory that when the victim was working as a sex worker and when their biological sex was revealed, that they were killed. This, however, has not been proven and is just a theory based on the clothing the victim was found wearing. For that reason, the biological sex of the victim, and due to how the police address this victim, I will continue to use Gilgo Beach Doe until further updates have been given. There's a sketch drawn, but nothing else has been released. I'm honestly floored by the tangled web of information that exists of all these cases. The fact that there's so many bodies recovered from such a small area and that some of them are connected to a serial killer is baffling. So far, only 4 of these 11 victims have been connected to the arrest of the Long Island serial killer, or LISK, suspect Rex Heuermann. Who is he? I want to say a disclaimer that while the suspect has been arrested, he has still not been convicted or found guilty of the crimes. For that reason, all of the information is alleged, and these are only allegations until he receives his day in court. Rex Heuermann is a 59-year-old architect who lives in Long Island. He was arrested on July 13, 2023. He has an office he works out of on 5th Avenue in New York City, and this is where the police actually arrested him from. He grew up in Long Island and lived in that area his whole life. He is also married and has children who he lives with. He worked on construction and renovation projects in the city. He also worked with bigger name brands as written on his own website. At this time, he is being charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. His defense attorney says that Heuermann denies the allegations and says he didn't do it, that he is not guilty. There is some evidence that the police have released to the press that they believe connect him to the victims. There's records of him looking up extreme forms of pornography, sex workers, and even pornography involving minors. While this shows deviant and abhorrent behavior, it doesn't connect him directly to the murders. However, police have revealed that there were female hairs found on the victims that they believe belonged to Heuermann's wife. And before that, another tip linked him to Amber Lynn Costello and her disappearance. A witness tip says that they saw a Chevrolet Avalanche and that it was connected to her disappearance. Heuermann does own this type of vehicle. There's also phone records from the burner phones used to contact the victims prior to their disappearances, and to Melissa Barthelemy's sister, who received taunting phone calls after she went missing. These burner phones were connected to email accounts, which helped investigators track the things Heuermann was doing on them. There were searches on the cell phones that showed he looked up the victims' names and updates in their cases, as well as updates on the Long Island serial killer case. A male hair was found on the burlap sack used to wrap Megan Waterman that matched the DNA police gathered from pizza crusts that Heuermann left behind after eating. With this much evidence, it is apparent why police went ahead and arrested him. I do want to say that while I'm happy there is an update for this case, I'm cautious until more information has been released. and if a conviction occurs, then it will feel more final that cases are closed. I'm happy that there's been such a big spotlight on the victims since this update. There's still no killer linked to Jessica Taylor or Valerie Mack's cases, and no identification for the 4 does. I hope with this big push to solve the Gilgo 4, the others will receive more attention, and maybe genetic genealogy can be used to help ID the remaining victims or their killers. Thank you so much for watching until the end. I know this is not what I usually upload for a video, but I was really happy to see an update for one of these bigger cases, and I am happy to hear that maybe 4 cases could potentially be closed. I also just wanted to shine a spotlight a bit more on the unidentified victims and on the victims whose killers have still not been brought to justice. Thank you so much for watching, and if you have any recommendations for cases, please put them in the comments below. I'll see you in the next one.